All right, we're going to take a look at a little project that came up on one of the groups that I belong to, and I thought it would make for a good teachable moment about some of the basic things here in Inkscape, how to create artwork, but also how to convert that artwork into embroidery using the InkStitch plugin. So first things first, we set our document to be 3 inches by 3 inches. So over here, you can click on the down arrow and you'll come down here, you'll see an option that says document properties. And then that's where we can set our 3 inch by 3 inch box for our document, because that's how big our image is going to be. And then let's go ahead and import our artwork. And we'll call it heart. Crossover here. When we import it, we'll go ahead and click OK. And there it is. Can't really see it right now because we're in outline mode. So if we go to View, Display Mode, Normal, now we can, of course, see it. And we could scale it. If we hold our Control key down, it will scale proportionately. Okay. So we want to scale it roughly the size of our document here. We can always scale it afterwards, but we'll just scale it so it's roughly 3 by 3. So give or take, it's roughly 3 by 3, right? So there you go. Also, just as a side note, let me scale this back down. So you see how it's kind of in this lower left corner? If we hold the Shift key down, so if we position it in the middle, where we ultimately want it, and then hit Control and Shift, it will scale. When we scale it from this corner, it will kind of scale from the center out. So you see how we can scale it up like that. Rather than if we just do it the other way, it's going to do it, from one corner or another. So like if we position it in the center now and then resized it, you see how it always kind of like the anchor is always down here. But if we position our graphic in the middle, Control and Shift, then it will resize from the center. Okay, just those little things to get used to. All right, so let's go over here to our layers and objects. And this is something that when you're first starting out, it's really useful to understand and learn because it's going to really help you keep track of what's going on in your document. So you can see here, we're on layer 1, and there's currently an image on layer 1, okay? And if we want to lower the opacity of this image, or maybe we don't want to see the image, see there, we could just turn it on and off. Just makes life easy. This little box here allows us to set the opacity, which currently for layer 1 is set at 50%, which I think we're gonna go ahead and use. And if we didn't want to be able to move this image, then that's where that lock comes into play. Or we could lock the whole layer. Okay. And sometimes I do find it helpful to go ahead and create multiple layers rather than and be able to turn layers on and off. It can be quite helpful. Okay. So first thing we want to do now is we want to use Inkscape to recreate this heart shape. Now there's a variety of different ways we can do that, but I'm going to show you just kind of the most simplistic way, and that is just to use Inkscape and the pen tool within Inkscape. So there's where you find the pen tool, but I really would encourage you to learn your keyboard shortcuts, because if you do, especially if you use Inkscape a lot, those keyboard shortcuts are going to save you an immense amount of time. So hit the B key on your keyboard for the pen tool, okay? And what we're going to do is we're going to create what we call nodes, and that will help us define the shape that we want to define. And the best way I could describe it, this is something that you just got to try and play with, and this is a great, simple little example here. But you just have to understand how the tool works, and it's the best way to do that is to watch a video and then try and repeat what that person did. So right down here, we're going to click our start point. That's easy enough. Everyone can do that. And everywhere there's a major change in the direction of a line, that's where we want to click next. So I feel like right here, there's a major change because the curve goes up, right, and kind of to the right, but now at this point, it's going up, but now it's curving over to the left. So I feel like there's a change there. I feel like there's a change there. Obviously, there's a change here, 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 and here. Now, where you actually click is completely irrelevant. Let's go ahead and right click to end this section. And the reason it's irrelevant is because we can always modify it quite easily too. So don't stress too much of where you're clicking and get too frustrated because it's really easy to fix. Now, you can see we've created several straight line segments, but it's a bit of a mess right now. So what we want to do is, really it's a little bit too wide also. So let's go over here to fill in stroke, and you can see that currently the stroke width is 6 millimeters. Now, a quick little math quiz here, and talk a little bit about embroidery too. As a general rule, we don't want satin columns to be less than 1.5 millimeters, and that is extremely tiny, okay? So what is 6 millimeters, and how does that equate to inches? Well, let's just switch over to inch value, and you'll see what it equates to. 0.23. Well, it is helpful for us to understand what our decimal values are as well. So, so in this case, I went to school for architecture, so I learned, my decimal tables a long time ago. But basically, 6 millimeters is 1/4 of an inch. Obviously, it's not quite because it's 0.23, where 1/4 of an inch is 0.25. But you get the idea. So, so it just really depends on how wide we want our satin column to be. In this case, we're ultimately going to try and make a applique file. That's kind of what we're after here. But we're just kind of laying the underlying groundwork for it first. So because we're ultimately doing applique, I think 1/4 of an inch is probably a pretty good size for the finished satin border around our applique. 1/4 of an inch is still pretty tiny. Can we do less? Sure, you could go smaller, but I don't think not significantly smaller. So I am going to just stick with millimeters, okay? But I'll try to describe the equivalent. I am going to go over here to the view menu and choose display mode and outline because I want to see I'll tell you what we're going to do. I'm going to change my mind. Let's do this. Let's set the stroke to be 1 millimeter, and let's go back into normal display mode because I want to look at my original artwork. Okay. So what we need to do now is we need to kind of bend all of our straight line segments. So we do that with our node tool, which is right up here, and the keyboard shortcut for node is the letter N, and we're just going to come up here and push like so. You see how easy that is to push these right there. Boom. We just click and drag. So you can see that part of it. It's pretty easy. Now we're not exactly following the line here, but if we click on that node, it gives us these additional control handles where we can really fine tune exactly what we want. Now, if we find that we're using our control handles and we're not getting what we want, well then you need more nodes, more places to control exactly what you're after. So let's see how we do up here. So we're going to bend this first of all. Our control handles are now showing up. So if I click here and I click here, and you can see we get a reasonable duplication of that curve that we wanted. Okay, and then we'll do the same thing up here. We'll come up here, we'll move that there, click, and then we've got our control handles where we can control everything a bit more specifically. So you can see, pretty accurate, right? So let's go over to our layers palette and let's get rid of our layer 1, just the visibility of it, because I just want to look at where we're at here. Okay. Now, if you kind of visualize where those nodes were, there was one right there, right there, right there, and over here. This one that's over here, you can see is quite smooth. Where this one, there's just a tiny little bobble. Just a tiny little, it's not perfectly smooth, not perfectly smooth, not perfectly smooth. And I'm a real stickler for perfectly smoothness. So we're just going to click on that node, and then we'll hold our shift key down and click on the other nodes that we want to smooth out. Okay, so that's what this function does here. It says make selected nodes smooth, and you can see they are in fact much smoother, and they didn't change our original shape much. Although, do you see this one here? I don't know if it shows very well in the video. That one is pretty smooth. This one is pretty smooth. That one is. This one I don't like. I don't like this one. It doesn't seem perfectly smooth to me, even though we clicked on make it smooth. But there's an easy way to fix it. So let's go ahead and double click on our shape. And all I do to fix it is I add a node on one side of where I think it needs smoothing, and then I add a node on the other, and then I just delete the one in the middle. And then when you do that, then the software kind of recalculates, and now you can see it. I feel like that is super smooth. Now, like I said, I don't know if it translates well to the video, but to me, that is super smooth. Okay. So next up, let's go ahead and go back in and let's make that wider. And we decided it's going to be 6 millimeters, right? That's going to be our finished satin border. Okay. Now we're gonna be making some modifications to this. So I'm gonna highly suggest that let's name this final satin border. Okay, so that's going to be our final satin border layer. And let's create a new layer. And let's just call this one placement. Yeah, we'll call this placement layer. Okay, and we'll click add. And then let's go ahead and add a new layer. And this one's going to be tack down layer. Okay. So that's going to be our tack down layer. We'll add that. And I should point this out too. The way InkStitch will run this file, it starts at the bottom of our layer stack and works our way towards the top. Okay. So I'll explain what this placement and tack down layer is for, but this is our final satin border. But before we mess with the final satin border, let's go ahead and just duplicate that path. So there's the duplicate. We'll put that on the placement layer, and then we're going to duplicate it again, and we'll put that on the tack down layer. Okay, so for now, we're just going to turn off the visibility of our tack down, turn off the visibility of our placement. And obviously, because this will be the last thing that sews, we need to move that to the top of the layer stack. Okay, and we'll come back to that. So how do we turn this path into satin stitches? Well, there's a variety of ways to do it. Certainly, there's a variety of ways to do it. And let's take, I tell you what, let's see, I'm just trying to debate how I want to do this. Let's go ahead and just duplicate what we have. And let's just take a look at the most kind of what I consider the most basic way. And that would be, we have a path that we created. It's one single path. It does cross over itself, and that will become important. But so we have a path, and what we want to do is we want to convert it to satin. So there is a simple tool. If we go up here to extensions, come down to InkStitch, and come down here to Tool Satin, you can see it says convert line to satin. So let's go ahead and do that. Convert line to satin. The software is going to think about what it's selected, and it's going to think about how to go about creating that satin. Okay, and so it's come up with this. Well, we can't really tell exactly what we have here. I am going to go ahead and that underlying path, let's go ahead and get rid of that. The visibility of it. Remember, we did a duplicate. And so this is what the software created for us. Now, remember that path that we had, it crossed over itself. And this is you know, something that's going to be kind of interesting to just keep in the back of your mind. Also, the path had some rounded ends. So let's just see what the heck this actually is now. So we can go to InkStitch, Visualize and Export, and choose Simulator. and we'll see what it gave us. See why we like it, see why we don't like it. Okay, so honestly, that's not bad, right? That's not a bad look. Um, you know, I'm not upset about what we got. The one thing I do want to point out is notice, because of the way we drew the path to begin with, notice that we start here at the bottom, right? And then it crosses over itself. So you see how it's crossing over itself that way. Now, we may not mind that it crosses over those satin stitches, or we might not want that to happen, okay? So it just kind of depends on exactly how you want this to sew. And so that will kind of be the next thing. Now, obviously, this did not handle this very well. I do not like this in the middle, but that's why it's helpful for us to know how to control things and how the software works. And also, if you noticed in Simulator, we do not have our rounded ends, okay? So let's go ahead and delete that kind of automated thing that it gave us and take a look at our path again. So that is, I'm gonna actually just rename this original path, okay? And we are gonna duplicate that, okay? And now we can take a look at, I think it might be easier for us to go temporarily into outline mode here. Look at the path that we created. Well, we created this path. It goes over the top, comes down and around and through. So how could we control the output a little bit better and get better results when we're talking about converting satin? So the first thing we might want to do is this right here. You see that node right there? We're going to select that and then choose this option right here. Break path at selected node. Okay. So we said we want to break this path, but we haven't actually broken the path. All we did was at that node, we told the software, when we do break apart our path, that's where we want to break it, right there. So when we come over here to path and choose break apart, what you'll see is, you see now we have it broken apart. Let me turn off our original path because we don't need that. But now you can see our initial path that was one piece has now become two. So now if we select both of these, watch what happens. We come up here to extensions and we choose InkStitch, and we are going to choose Tool Satin, and we're going to choose the convert line to satin. And now we have a totally different result. So now let's go back into extensions and take a look at the simulator. Boom. Okay, so let's back up here. So you can see it's creating half of it, and then it's going to do our second piece. It's going to come over the top and over the top of our satin up here. So you can see, and like I say, you may want that, you may not want that. It just kind of depends on how you want it to stitch out. But let's say that, okay, let's say that we're okay with that, okay? We're okay with that, except I wanted the left-hand side to stitch before the right-hand side. That might be the only difference. So let's close that out. I'm just going to back up a step. And the big thing here is you see right now, this one is on top of this one. So the right hand should stitch, the left hand should stitch before the right hand. So if we want it the other way around, we just have to change that in our layer stack. Okay. So if I go back into InkStitch Tool Satin, convert line to satin. Now we didn't have to completely undo that. We could just switch the order of these two. So you can see here, this is going to stitch first. The left side is going to stitch first, and then the right. So let's go back in, because there's more to talk about. And it's good that we're working on a simple design because it's kind of the same way in all of our designs. Okay. And this is the one point that I wanted to make. So you see here, if I click on our jump stitches, this little frog, well, watch this. Notice that there's no jump stitches. If I click on my info tab, you can see it says jumps and trims are 0. Now this is always something that's important to consider. So you can see it starts there at the bottom, comes up to the top, finishes the right hand side, immediately goes to the left, and then come back down and around. Okay, perfect. That's exactly what we want. Now, do we want this to finish off like this in the middle? Maybe we do, maybe we don't. But I'm going to show you how to fix that. It's going to be really easy. So I will show you how to fix that. So let's go ahead and close that out. And let's just take a look at how we could fix that. So, for example, right here, these are what are called rails, satin rails. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm right behind this node, I'm just going to double click and create another one and drag this out a little bit. Right behind this one, double click, create a node, and just do that. Okay, and then over here, I'm doing the exact same thing. I'm just going to drag this out to here, drag this one out to here, and then we can always add another node, something like that. These don't have to be straight lines. They can be, so they could be like this. They don't have to be perfectly straight. Okay, and these can actually come really close to one another. Okay, so just kind of keep that in mind. You can really play around with this a little bit where these can all come together. Now this one here is a little bit messed up, so I'm going to put that back so these can kind of touch right there. And this right here, this one here, we can kind of, and keep in mind, like if you didn't want to see this one, if you just want to focus on this one, we can always turn that off, that visibility off. So we can just deal with this one. Okay, and then once you're happy with that one, then we can turn the other one back on, and then we can line things up. Okay, something like that. But now you can kind of see how this path is. So I think I'm just going to delete that node, come up here, and I'm just going to smooth this out a little bit. See this one here? I'm going to put right there, kind of line everything up to our other one. Okay, so now you kind of see how it's all lined up. So that's good. Got a weird thing happening here. We'll straighten that out a little bit. Now, so we make that tiny little change right there. And then let's take a look at what that did for us. Now, might turn out just fine, might not. Let's just look at it. If something doesn't look right in simulator mode, it's always because of something we have in our artwork. It's just not quite right. Okay, so if something's off here, it's because of our artwork. So I am going to back up here. I want to look at, okay, I want to look at that. So you can see that first section, but you see how we manipulated that and curved that? It took care of our satin perfectly. So that turned out perfect. And now it's creating our next one on top. Okay. And what I think is going to be helpful for us, just so we can really understand. So we backed up and we're looking at the right hand side right now. And you can see that the satin stitch does in fact look perfect, right? But what if I want to look just at the left hand side? Well, that's where, again, you could just select this, and we could come into extensions, InkStich params, and then it would only show us one. But when we go into params, it has a similar view that simulator has. Okay, and what I'm looking for is I wanted to make sure that this end is stitching properly, but I couldn't really tell and see that in the other view. Okay, because we already had stitches and then we put stitches on top of stitches, so I couldn't see this by itself. So that's one way. If you want to see how one piece of the puzzle is stitching, just select it and go into params, and it will give you a simulated view similar to what we get in Simulator. The other thing that we could have done is just come in here and turned the visibility of that path off, and then we could still go in to Visualize Simulator, and we get the same thing. Then we could look at just the pieces that we're interested in, not the whole design. So there you go. So now you can see, there you go, right? So in the original design, the bottom here was rounded off on both sides. And I'm going to kind of take a few steps back here, and I want to show you something that's pretty cool. In this particular scenario, I think I would handle the end caps pretty much like I showed you, but there is another option, okay? So let me just go ahead and delete what we just created, and let's go back to our original path. Take a look at that. All right, so right now we have one path, which is the original path that we created, right? So what we want to do is do what we did before, is we select that node, and we do want to break that node, and then we'll go to path and break apart our path, and then you can see that we do in fact have two pieces like we did previously, right? So there you go. Now, if I go back over here to our view menu and look at our normal mode, you can see that we do have a path, right? And we do have rounded ends, okay? So our next step then is to use our conversion tool to convert the thickness of our stroke so it becomes two paths. So let's go back into View, Display Mode, Outline. So sometimes you may want to do it this way as far as converting to satin. Sometimes you may want to do it this way. So we're going to select both of our paths, and we'll come up here to the path, and we'll choose Stroke to Path. Okay? And so now you can see that we have the rounded edge here, rounded edge here, rounded, right? Well, all we have to do is, and I should point out too, that we still have the overlapping down here happening. So all we really have to do is we have to create rails. Well, how do we create rails that InkStitch can interpret? Well, it's really easy. So a lot of times when I have objects that have these rounded caps that I'm converting to satin, all I'm going to do is double click on my path, and we already have a node there, okay, by default. So all we're going to do is click on that node and choose this option, break selected node. And then come down here, click on this path, and you'll see there'll always be a node there. And we're going to choose break. Now, obviously, we do not have to do this node by node. So we could do both nodes. So this is the end, this is the start, right? So again, we have that node, and we'll choose break at node. So on this path here, we're going to select both. So we have this node here, right? Now we don't have a node here. Oh, I already broke that one, probably, is what I'm guessing is what happened. I did already break it, my bad. So we'll just go ahead and break this one then. Break at node. Had I not already broken it, we could have selected both, right? So you select one, you hit your control key, you select another one, and there you go. Okay. So now, as the way InkStitch will interpret that, because we broke it right here, we broke it up here, right? And the same thing, we broke it here and broke it here. The way InkStitch is going to interpret that is now we have two pieces. Even though technically we still have one path, but the way InkStitch looks at it, we have two. So let me show you. I'm just going to convert one right now. So this time we're going to go to Extensions, InkStitch Params, and you can see that it automatically has this as a fill. Yes, it does. All right, let's back that up. See, I'm glad it actually did this, because we can't have a fill. We cannot have a fill on a satin object. But if you recall, if we go back over here to normal display mode, you can see that in fact we do have a fill. So we cannot have a fill. So we're going to left click. Cannot have a fill, but we do need a stroke. So we can shift click any of these colors, and now we have a stroke. Okay, so now when we go up to extensions, InkStitch, and choose params, now it will automatically convert it into satin. We got to turn off our running stitch, and then of course then it will automatically convert it to satin. Oh, I'm so glad that it showed us this mistake. All right, so you can see that by default it's going to assume that we want running stitches, but as soon as we turn off running stitches, it'll switch over to satin column. And this is the main key thing that I wanted to show you, is that rounded edge. By the fact that we broke it at those 2 node points, look at there. We have this nice rounded satin on both ends. So that's one key thing I wanted to show you. But look at here. Look at here. What kind of mess is this? Well, that mess happens because we did not give InkStitch enough information. So let's go ahead and close that out. Well, what information does it need? Well, it needs to know how we want to handle these curves clearly. We have an issue up here because it didn't come around the bend like it should have. And it's really easy. We're going to go into our pen tool, and what's our keyboard shortcut? Yes, you guessed right. It's B. And we're just going to create some lines. Now, these are a little crazy, the thickness of those lines. So let's go into our stroke here, and let's get rid of the crazy. We're going to go with, say, 2 millimeter. Really, that's even crazy. Let's go with 1. The width of this is irrelevant. So the width of these lines doesn't really matter. But we'll go ahead and do what this does. Every time we add one of these lines, what this does is it tells InkStitch very specifically how we want our stitches to be angled. Well, how do we want those stitches to be angled? Previously, we didn't specify anything, so it didn't know what to do. So it just made it up as it went. But now we've specifically told this is what we want. Now, did I go a little crazy drawing these lines? Yes. So you don't have to go like way, make them as big as I did and things like that. But they also don't need to be particular whatsoever either. But the way InkStitch interprets this, let's go back to our layers path so you can fully understand. So we have the original path, but then we have all of these pieces, right, that we added. So, so what we have to do for InkStitch is we have to select everything that we want InkStitch to look at, and then choose path and combine. So Control K is one of those keyboard shortcuts you're definitely going to want to remember, because we combine things a lot. And so now we've defined that we've got our rails and our rungs. And so our rungs, of course, are going to be our stitch angles. Now I do actually want that to stitch second, so we can leave it up top. But if we go to InkStitch, because we added the rails because we added our rungs, those lines that we added those to our rails. InkStitch threw away the original params, so we have to go back in and tell it exactly we want that to be satin again. So InkStitch params, and then of course we're going to turn off running stitch, because it's always going to assume we want. Look at it's creating all those things as running stitches, but as soon as we turn that off, it'll say, okay, so you want satin, and there you go. And see how perfect that is? And the reason that's so perfect is because we gave InkStitch the extra information it needed to say, okay, that's how you want those stitches to look as far as make that turn. I understand that, and now I'm going to give you a perfect result. So we could go ahead and choose apply and quit. And then we're going to do the same thing on the other side. So here, we're not going to have a fill. We do need a stroke. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and double click on my path. I'm going to control click there, and I've already broken that one, unfortunately. So I'm pretty sure that's true. Let me just click on that. That is true. I did already break it. So there we go. So I have my two rails now. I'm going to go to my pen tool, and I am going to just add. And you'll get a feel for this. So you'll get a feel for how many rungs you actually need to add too. I'm just going to add those rungs for this example, and hold my Shift key down. Remember, Control K, and I do want this to stitch first. So let's just take a look at that. Extensions, InkStitch, Visualize Simulator, and see if just 3 rungs is enough to get me my satin. But you know what I didn't do? I didn't set this up in params. My bad. InkStitch params, we do need to set that as a satin column. So we'll turn that running stitch off. Yes, it is going to be a satin column. So we're going to see if in fact those rungs were enough. And look at there. We get a nice perfect result, nice roundness on the bottom, and we've defined enough rungs so it knows exactly how to handle it up top there. So we'll go ahead and choose apply and quit. Beautiful. So now that part of the design is done. So let's go back up to extensions and InkStitch and come down here to visualize, and let's go back to simulator, and we'll see how this stitches out. So our right side's going to stitch first. It's going to come over. Look at there. A teachable moment. I love teachable moments. So there is a lot of little caveats to InkStitch, and this is a great learning opportunity. So we'll turn on our froggy here. So you can see here we have a jump stitch, the dreaded jump stitch. And you see what's happening here. Our right side is stitching. It finishes up top, and then it jumps all the way back to the bottom, and then it comes in and it does our left. Now, obviously, if we can avoid jump stitches, avoid trims, that's what we want to do. And so we have to go back into params and say, hey, wait a minute, we can't have this. So let's close that out. So remember, the way it's stitching is starting from the bottom, coming up and around and through, but then when it's doing the left-hand side, it's wanting to start the stitching down here, and no, we want the stitching to start right where it left off. Of course we do. So we would click on that and go back into InkStitch, and we'll choose params. And this is something you have to do a lot, is change direction of how things stitch and so forth. This happens quite a bit. So what do we do? How do we get it to stitch in the opposite direction? Well, first of all, let's choose swap rails. And look at there. It's starting from the top now and stitching from the bottom. That, of course, is what we wanted to have happen. So we'll choose apply and quit. Something that's, I don't know if, yeah, it's not similar to swap rails. That's the wrong word. But sometimes we want the stitching to either start on this side or this side. Sometimes we want to specify what side it stitches on. So sometimes we need to use this reverse rails option to be able to specify where it starts and stops. In this case, you can see it's starting and stopping right at the very point where we broke our paths. So now this is going to stitch in the right order. We'll hit apply and quit, and we'll come back up here to extensions, InkStitch. We'll choose simulator again, and you'll see we probably made a mistake. Let me look at this. Probably made a mistake. So this is on top. What's going on here? I'm not sure what exactly was going on there, but now we've got both of our paths. This path was sitting out outside of this layer for some reason. I'm not sure why. But at any rate, now this path is within this layer, so it should stitch this one first and then that one. So let's go back in and take a look. All these little things that just creep up on us, and there's a reason. There's always a reason. So you can see our right does in fact stitch first, our right finishes, and then it immediately goes to the left like it's supposed to. So you can see there it's finishing up, boom, and then starting the left immediately, coming back around and overlapping. All right, so good information, right? We actually learned quite a few things there. But there's one little burning thing that I think is important, just so you know how to control it and when to control it and things of that nature. So let's take a look at one more thing here. All right, on our final satin border, we're going to go ahead and turn that off. Let's go ahead and turn on, let's see, what do we want to do exactly? I'm going to create a new layer, and we'll call it alternate satin. We'll call it something like that, okay? I love creating layers because then they're so easy to turn on and off. I just think that's a smart thing to do. So we'll turn on our placement layer. So that brings us back. We're going to duplicate our original path. Move that up to my alternating satin, and then I can just turn off my placement layer again. So all we have is our alternate satin. Let's go back into view menu and choose display mode outline. All right, so we have a path, right? So we have a path. Trying to figure out exactly how to describe this. So we have our original path, and then what I want to do is right here, we're going to choose that break path at selected node. Path, we're going to choose the break apart, right? So now you could clearly see we have two pieces now, right? We have the left and the right again. But what I want to talk about is where these two paths overlap one another. How do we kind of control that a bit more? And so that's what we're going to talk about here. So first thing that we're going to do is we need to change these to have the proper width. So remember, we're going to go to path, stroke to path. And you can see there that we do have this overlap, right? So this right side is sitting on top of the left, okay? And what we want is, remember, we want the right side to stitch and then the left side, okay? So I'm just trying to think about this and how I'm going to describe this to you. Essentially, what we want to do is right here where the two things overlap, we do not want satin stitches on top of satin stitches. In this particular example. In the previous example, I don't think it's really going to matter. Like if you were to actually stitch this out, I don't think you would actually see like this big hump of stitches on top of stitches, okay? But if you want to control that, this is just something that you got to think about kind of as we go a little bit here, okay? So let's think about this. How would we go about stitching this out? I want it to appear as if our left side is stitching on top of our right, but I don't actually want any stitches there. So what I'm going to do is our left side here, for this purpose, has to be on top because it's going to stitch second, right? And so now our right is on bottom. Now we have to duplicate this. So I've duplicated it, and I'm going to hold my shift key and select on the right, and we're going to choose this option, path, and choose difference, okay? And now you'll see, right? Now you'll see that this was cut up here, and this was cut down here. And you know what? I didn't actually want that. Ooh, I didn't actually want that. I don't want it to cut. I do want it to overlap here. I don't want it to overlap here. Okay. So how do we do that? Like, you know, this is, like I said, to me, this is just a good exercise to explain, well, how in the heck would we do that? Well, it's pretty simple. So first of all, you can see this path is overlapping the right up top here. So we need to not have that happen. So I'm just going to select that and delete all these nodes right here. Boop, gone. Okay. So now it doesn't matter how crazy it looks up here. Well, I guess it kind of does, because we can't have, let's see here. It does kind of matter. This line we can't have because it was still slightly overlapping. So you see here, we just deleted a few nodes, and now we're going to select our cutter and our path that we want to cut, and we're going to choose path difference. Okay, so now you can see up top, we have the overlap still, but we don't have the overlap here, that's what we wanted. So now what are we going to do as far as defining our rails and all that business? Well, we have two pieces here. So the first thing we're going to do is choose path and break apart. So now the top half of the right is separate from the bottom half. So we have to be mindful of how this stuff, you can see here, it's starting right here and then picking up there, and then it's going to pick up our left. So if we remember previously, remember we were talking about the software needs rails. So watch what we're going to do. We're going to click on our bottom section, right? And we're going to click here. We're going to hold our control key down, and we're going to click here. So control key, click there. I guess, let me back up here a little bit. Maybe we'll hold our shift key down. There we go. Not control. I'm sorry. So shift key, boom, boom, boom. And what we're going to do is we're going to choose to break apart at all 3 points. Now, this is where the waters get a little bit murky. All right. Because remember previously we just broke here and here and we called it good. And that was 2 rails. And now we've broken apart here, here, and here. So let me kind of tell you how InkStitch is going to look at things. This is still all one piece. Okay, it's all one piece. So in our minds, we're thinking that's one path when it's really not, because we told it to break at 3 different points. So really, technically, we have 3 pieces. We have a total of 3 pieces going on here. And in fact, if I were to come up here and choose path break apart, that would be confirmed. Look, we got that piece, we got this piece, and we got that other piece right there, right? That's the way InkStitch would think about this, which is fine, right? So I'm going to just back up here. So that's what happens. You have 3 pieces. But the way InkStitch is going to interpret this, it's going to interpret this left side to be a rail, the right side to be a rail, and that to be a rung. How cool is that, right? So if we select that right now and go to Extensions, InkStitch Params, you'll see this in action. We'll turn off the automatic, see, it automatically gives us a fill and it doesn't give us a satin. Anytime that happens is because we screwed up. We need to turn off the fill, my bad, and we do need to have some type of stroke color. Now we do, and so now we can go back into Extensions, InkStitch Params, and now it will give us the satin option. There you go, see? So we're going to turn off our running stitch because we don't want that, and it looks like I don't know what's going on. See, something crazy is going on. Anytime something's crazy happening is because our artwork is messed up. So let's look at our artwork and see what in the world I did here. So let's go back under the view menu, display mode, normal. And it looks like we still have a fill applied here. And we shouldn't. So there you go. So now we have no fill applied, just a stroke. Let's try it again. So InkStitch Params, I'm glad that actually happened, because when it happens to you, you'll understand, hey, what's going on here? So we're not going to have a running stitch. but we do want satin columns. Now, here's where things get murky again, is because InkStitch is a little bit confused because of we've asked it for certain things. We've broken it apart, and it doesn't really know what's a rail and what's wrong at this point. Okay, it knows that we have 3 pieces, right? But it doesn't know what the heck's what. So it's easy enough to fix. Remember, if there's something weird happening here, it's because of our artwork. So we'll close that out. And what we have to do is we just have to be more mindful. Okay. So all we have to do is, and I think it's probably easiest just to go ahead and break it apart, right? And we have 3 separate elements. We don't technically need this at all. We don't need that at all. We just need those 2 pieces. So let's go ahead and try it again. I went ahead and used my keyboard shortcut of Control K to combine those 2 pieces and go back into params. With such a simple piece like this, I don't think we need any rungs. But if we don't get the results that we expect here, then maybe we do. Okay. So there you go. Now you can see a satin column. Now you did notice that it's stitched from the top down, when we can't have that. So we definitely need to stitch from the bottom up. But you could see that it stitches, and because it's such a simple piece, we don't necessarily need rungs. So we'll go ahead and choose apply and quit. Be satisfied with that. So now we know what we need to do up here, right? So so first of all, with this segment, we have no fill. We do need a stroke. And then we're going to double click on it. We're going to select these 2 nodes, and then we're going to hold our shift key down and select that one. And then we're going to break it, right? And then we are going to have to come up here and choose path break apart, because we need to delete that one. We don't want that piece at all. So now InkStitch knows, okay, we've got 2 separate rails. There's our 2 separate rails. And then we hit the B key on our keyboard, and just like we did previously, we do have to tell it how to control the stitches around the bend there. Okay, so now we've done that. And so let's go ahead and select those. Shift select this rail and this rail. Control K on our keyboard. Whoops. I accidentally, let's see what I did here. And another thing that's really cool is if we just hold on our Alt key and do this, everywhere, anything that crosses over that red line that we created, how cool is that? It'll automatically allow us to select it. Just hold the Alt key down, and that's just another way to select all those pieces. Control K. And now when we come up here to InkStitch, come to params, we are going to turn off our running stitch, and you can see that does a pretty good job, except there's some issues right there. So that's a problem. It's also stitching from here to there, and we don't want that. So we do need it to stitch in the opposite direction. That's not going to help us with our issues here, but it does kind of get that going. So let's go ahead and close that out. So we do have some issues there. So what we're going to have to do is we'll go ahead and we'll add more rungs here. And I don't know if maybe we'll change this rung a little bit, and I don't know, maybe add one more. Sometimes you got to play around with the rungs a little bit. So I'm going to hold down my Alt key, not have that selected. Hold down my Alt key and just come in here and go all kinds of crazy over those. That will select all of those. Control K. And then let's go to extensions, InkStitch params, and see if that didn't help us out a little bit. So again, we'll get rid of the running stitch here. It's coming around. Yes. definitely better. Now you see how these are kind of angled this way? Could that ease into that corner a little bit better? Perhaps. Perhaps. I don't really know exactly what's happening here. But perhaps we could see. Maybe something like that. I don't know. That's really going to get the job done, but we'll take a look at it. Okay, I see a small issue here. Not sure why. See, those rungs were not attached to my rails. I'm not quite sure why that is. Now they will be. But that using the Alt key and crossing over, that should have gotten that. But for some reason it didn't. But now those definitely are all together, where they weren't before. So that will probably definitely help us with the way this is going to stitch. So we do not want running stitches. We do want satin stitches. And yes, I do like the way those come around that corner. Definitely come around the corner better. Although we do need it to stitch from the bottom up. And it's going to come around. Beautiful. So apply and quit. All right. So this side here, what are we doing here? So we're going to just click here and shift click on this one. We are going to break apart. We're not going to have a fill. We do need a stroke. Okay. And we do need some rungs. So we'll go to our pen tool and we'll click here, put a rung there, 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 and maybe one more here. Probably don't need it. This is simple enough where we don't need rungs there. And let's come in here and select these. Still only selecting that one path. That is strange that it's not selecting these. So that's okay. We'll just come in here and select all of them. And so now you can see we have all that selected. We'll combine it all, Control K. And we do need that to stitch. So this is going to stitch first, second, and third. So now we can define these params, InkStich params. And we are not going to have running stitches. It's stitching from the bottom up, so we do need to swap our rails. So we do need to stitch from the top down. I am happy with the way those satins are coming around the bend. So happy with that. We'll choose apply and quit. All right, so now we can take a look at the whole stitch out here. Simulator. Because there's basically one more thing to talk about. And that is what happens here. Is there a jump stitch? Let's back up. No! There is a jump stitch. You see that there? So we don't want that to happen. All right? And notice that the bottom segment is stopping on the left side and the top segment is starting on the right side. So that is a bit of an issue as well. It's really easy to resolve. And the reason that we don't want jump stitches, if you know how your machine works, anytime there's a jump stitch, the machine has to it's almost like a thread trim. It has to slow down, but instead of trimming, it has to jump to the next point. And depending on the length of that jump, it'll go, like, so like if it's jumping, 10 millimeters or 20 millimeters, there's a definite slowdown in the machine. And we don't want jump stitches, and we don't want, we don't want jump stitches, and we don't want thread trims. I do want to show you something here in InkStitch that we can use that will be easy for us in this example, but to me as a whole, it does not work well. And that is, so if we select this bottom piece and hold our shift key and select the top piece, there is a function in here under extensions and InkStitch. Like I said, it will work in this instance, but not in most instances. So, but there's a function in here called tool satin, and it says auto route satin columns. Okay, when we click on that, it's going to give us a couple options. It's saying, do we want to trim jump stitches, and do we want to preserve the order of our satin columns? Well, in this case, we do want to preserve the order of our satin columns, but if I hit live preview, it'll show us what it actually does here. And what it actually does is actually kind of crazy. I thought it would work in this instance, but I guess I was wrong. So it's added this line up top here, and that is not what we want. So we're just going to close. That's not what we want to do. So we're going to have to take control anyhow. But anyhow, that's why that feature doesn't work. Like I'm going to say it doesn't work. I wouldn't even use it. Forget it exists, because 9 times out of 10, especially when we're choosing that preserve, to me, it just doesn't stitch right. What we all we need is we need to connect these two pieces together. Okay, that's all we need to do. So let's go to our pen tool here. Let's zoom in a little bit. So we're just going to click, 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 click. That's it. That's all we're going to do. And then we have to convert it to a dashed line. So we're going to convert any dashed line. Doesn't matter what it is. Let's convert it to a dashed line. Now that's converted to a dashed line. Okay. Now the other key component is this has to stitch, and then my connecting line has to stitch. Boom. That's it. That's all we have to do. And now we'll have no jump stitches. So if we go to InkStitch and then choose Visualize and Simulator, what's going to happen is, because that's a dashed line, it's going to interpret that as a running stitch. So notice if I turn on my froggy here, that now it's going to stitch that bottom part, and then it's going to do a running stitch, never going to slow down, to the next segment. And then when we add our satin stitches on top, we're not going to see it. Okay. Now, one other small, tiny little caveat, obviously, if we're concerned about it, if there's a little bit of gapping right here at the top and right here at the bottom, let's go ahead and close this out. Obviously, all we would have to do is just come in here, right? And we just move that up just ever so much, right? We're not moving it up much, right? So we just moved it up a little bit. Now watch what happens when we go back into Extensions, InkStitch, Simulator. Those will go just slightly past. We'll kind of walk this slowly here. And you can see how those now will just overlap a stitch or two. And that should help with our gapping. Okay, so if there's any issues with push-pull compensation or something like that, that will take care of that. All right? All right, so I know that this was kind of a lot longer than you probably wanted for such a basic, simple little thing, but there were a lot of things in this video that if you understand how all the components work, then you can get the results you want. And all this stuff really, I promise you, once you really got it down pat, all this stuff will just become second nature to you. But those are just some different options that you have available for you. If I were doing it for real, I would probably just break these ends rather than manipulate the ends. Remember before all the ends were squared off and then we had to manipulate the ends. By the time we manipulated all those ends, this we could have done much quicker, in my opinion. So for what it's worth, that's it. I hope you found some value in this. Thanks for watching.